we'll kick this off. So we're so excited. Thank you everyone for joining Origin and Attention Grace for an event on perimenopause and your pelvic floor. I know this is an area very few women feel prepared for or knowledgeable on, and it can create just a lot of fear and shame. I was about to merge those together into fame, but I think that's quite right.
Not always.
And just a lot of ambiguity as you go through this process. So I always find it so fascinating when I type perimenopause into like an email or into a Word document, spell check doesn't even recognize it. So I think that just speaks to kind of the lack of understanding and education we've done around it. My mom always jokes also, she can't wait until millennials go through menopause because we're just going to talk about it. So hopefully we can bring that kind of energy to this event.
Yes.
I know this is something so many of our patients at Origin struggle with. And so we're really excited to bring this community together with an incredible partner and just share some helpful tools, like how to prepare, what the heck perimenopause even is, and ultimately how to think about that as you transition into menopause. So we are also so excited to partner with, like I said, Attention Grace, a personal care brand focused on destigmatizing aging, which is really what this whole talk is about. So just as a quick reminder before I turn it over to our experts, we are recording this session and we'll share it out with all the attendees and registrants after. So if you need to leave or hop off, you'll get the full recording. Also, just a reminder, this is not medical advice. So we always recommend you speak with your provider if you have other kind of follow-up questions. We'll do our best to cover all the bases, but just something to flag. And we got a lot of questions in advance, I think like 20 or 30 questions. So we'll try to address those during this discussion. But we'll also do a Q&A at the end, and feel free to drop any Q&As in the chat or the Q&A box during the event, and we'll cover those. And last but not least, stick around because we have a giveaway at the end from the Attention Grace team. So I'm really excited to share more on that. And with that, let's do a quick round of introductions. So a little bit about Origin. I'm Allison. I lead the marketing team here at Origin. We are a women's health company really focused on physical therapy for your pelvic floor and whole body. So that could be everything from, painful sex, pregnancy, postpartum, but, topical for this group is all that happens to your body during menopause into your pelvic floor, which we're going to dig in a little on. What's awesome about us is that we are really believing in accessible care. And so we're in network with most major commercial insurers, and we do care virtually and in person. So that's a little bit about Origin. And then I'm going to introduce the panelists, and I'll let Alex share some more on Attention Grace. So first from Origin, we have Dr. Ashley Rollins, my favorite physical therapist from Texas. She leads our virtual team there, and she specializes in the treatment of pelvic floor muscle dysfunction, pelvic pain, sexual dysfunction, with a whole smattering of other specialties. And then from Attention Grace, we have Alex Finnell, who's the co-founder, and she's a super passionate advocate for women's health. I think on our first discussion, we just talked about everything that's wrong with healthcare and gender bias, and she's done a incredible job building this brand, which she can share more with you about in a little bit. And I'll let Alex share the overview of Attention Grace, and then hand it over to you, Ashley.
Thank you, guys. It's so fun to be with you here, and we are such fans of Origin. So this is truly an honor to be teaming up. And just a little bit about Attention Grace. We launched about a year and a half ago, and we are building really the first personal care brand that is focused on not only destigmatizing aging, but doing it in a way where we're giving women access to cleaner, greener products that are better for our bodies and better for our planet. And really just trying to open up the whole conversation around aging and what happens to our bodies as we get older, and just creating a new conversation around all of it. So happy to be here.
All righty. Well, I'm going to take over again. My name is Ashley Rollins, and I'm a doctor of physical therapy at Origin, and I am based in Texas. But I'm joining you all here today to kind of go over all things perimenopause and your pelvic floor and how they may or may not be related. So we'll kind of go through all of this and hopefully touch on the majority of your questions, but also have time at the end for more. So just kind of topically, looking at the statistics, by 2025, there will be over 1 billion people experiencing menopause in the world. That's about 65% of women feel unprepared for menopause. And, and maybe that's just those that were surveyed. Maybe it's a whole lot more than that, right? But that's a huge majority of those people that will go through menopause feel unprepared for what is to expect. So what the heck is perimenopause? To kind of get you started, some of the numbers to kind of be looking at, 47 is the average age for the beginning of perimenopause, around the average time when it starts for most women. 51 is the average age of menopause onset, and many women report perimenopausal symptoms beginning in their early to mid 40s. These are the symptoms that can be misleading, overlapping with menopause. They may not even occur at all. So it can be an extremely confusing time. It's not just, you know, here are some symptoms and we know what's going on. Things can overlap and be confusing and jarring sometimes in this transition. So when we are talking about perimenopause specifically, you know, we've gone through all these different life changes. There's puberty. If you have children, there's pregnancy and postpartum, and all these differences in what's going on in our body. And here we are again. Technically, perimenopause is this time before menopause. It's this time once your ovaries start kind of winding down a bit to the point where you're in menopause. Technically, you're not in menopause until you've gone for a full year without bleeding. And so we're talking about this stage beforehand. The average duration of perimenopause is about 3 to 4 years, but this timeline varies significantly from person to person and can even last around 10 years.
Wow.
So what is going on in your body? You know, your hormones are changing, that's for certain. You know, your ovaries have been doing all of this work producing estrogen for all of these years, and it starts to decline. This can lead to all sorts of changes in our body. Decreased blood flow, the size of the clitoris can shrink. You'll possibly have reduced sensation and arousal. The vaginal tissues become thinner, less flexible. Our breasts sag. There's less natural lubrication and potential for pain with intercourse. If those vaginal tissues are thin and dry, then any type of penetration or friction to that area can be irritating. And also you at the same time are having weakening of pelvic floor muscles that can lead to things such as pelvic organ prolapse. And that weakening can become multifactorial. There's lots of different factors, and we'll go over a bit more in future slides, but it can be as a result of perimenopause. It can be pelvic floor muscle dysfunction, unrelated. It can also be related to natural changes related to aging. And peeing a little.
What does like prolapse look like or feel like? Because I think I didn't know what prolapse was until I started working here. So
yeah, absolutely. Organs, so our uterus and cervix, or the bladder and urethra, or the rectum, or even the small intestines can kind of drop down into the vaginal opening or the anal opening. So it's kind of like this drooping of our pelvic organs that can occur, you know, in various stages of our life, but can maybe be more prominent in that perimenopausal stage if we are experiencing other symptoms that come along with it, like the weakness. Our pelvic organs are, and I'll talk about more when we talk about the pelvic floor a bit, but our pelvic organs are supported by pelvic floor muscles that go from our pubic bone to our tailbone, and they kind of almost act like water underneath our pelvic organs, helping to support them. There's, of course, ligaments that are helping to support them as well, but when there's muscle weakness, then those can sag. And also, if the tissues surrounding it aren't as lush and thick and healthy as they once were, they're thinner, then there is less support from that aspect as well. And it can lead to symptoms like pelvic heaviness, like a feeling of falling out. You might even see or feel tissue dropping out of the vaginal opening.
Yeah, so I will share a super quick anecdote there. My first experience, this is the first time I learned about pelvic floor therapy, or really even what the pelvic floor actually was when I was pregnant with our second child. And I think I was probably about 6 months or so along. Yeah. And I went to the bathroom and was terrified because I thought I was having a miscarriage. And it was actually, fast forward, get to the ER and what have you, and it was prolapse.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on with our bodies, right? And you know, and when you're not prepared for things like that, it can be extremely terrifying.
Yeah.
A lot can come with the knowledge and answers, and knowing that there likely is support, and probably what you experienced potentially after that experience was, okay, this is going to be okay. I'm going to work with a team, and I'm going to get the treatment that I need. And very true to the same as perimenopause and menopause, because there's so much fear around the unknown, and especially with, you know, to kind of go to the point of, there's not a whole lot going on for, you know, for the health of those with uteruses and ovaries. And, you know, it's really helpful to at least know that there's a team of people out there. There are people out there that can support you, and you don't have to suffer through it.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I know it's pelvic organ prolapse can be one of those things that just kind of pops up. I guess no pun intended. Yeah. And it's nice to know that it can happen and that there is help. So,
Yes.
And then peeing, that a little can happen a lot. There are changes in the bladder function that you may have that may have you running to the bathroom more often than you used to be. This could be frequency, so running more frequently than you used to. Common, going to the bathroom once every 2 to 4 hours, it's normal. And if you're going more frequent, then that's frequency. Urgency, if you're like, all of a sudden you can't hold it any longer and you got to rush to the bathroom on time, is also a symptom of bladder dysfunction. Can be a sign of pelvic floor muscle dysfunction as well. And then, like I touched on before, there are age-related muscle and sensory changes in the bowel and bladder. You know, weakness in some of the muscles, some of the muscle fibers will, related to age changes, be less strong and less plentiful, less effective, and that can lead to, along with the other sensory changes, lead to other bowel and bladder dysfunction as well.
Actually, I feel like what I always hear, like I know we had a trampoline growing up, and my mom would come like bounce on it, and she'd bounce twice and be like, I can't, I have to get off. I'm gonna like pee my pants. And so I think the question, you know, like her response was sort of like, this is kind of my new normal. But I know we had a question too from someone earlier, which was, can I reverse my bladder and leakage? Like, is this now like permanent, the peeing a little, or is that something that can be addressed?
Yeah, good question. I know, you know, Alex, we got some response from in the email from Dr. From Barb.
Yeah. So Dr. Frank, oddly enough, it's occurring to me, was the woman who I met her that night when I went to the ER prolapse. So this is super like
lively then.
Circular. Yeah. But yeah, so Dr. Frank is one of our medical advisors, and she's also just the funniest OBGYN. Like certainly the funniest I've ever met. But yeah, she was keen that we share a few things with you all around sort of the reversibility. It absolutely can be reversed. And I think a lot of women don't necessarily know that. There's obviously, and I'll let Ashley talk about all of the pelvic floor exercises that you can do and work there. But Barbara also points to, for some women, losing weight can help. For other women, it can be as simple as changing your drinking habits and keeping, like she calls it, a bladder diary. And there's a blog post on our website about that if you want to read more there. And obviously, like just having like really candid conversations with your practitioners is key. I think sometimes not all doctors are not everyone's asking the questions, and just like feeling empowered and opened enough to like just have the conversation with your providers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it always really is about, well, what is the severity of symptoms and what are the underlying causes? And there are a variety of things that could contribute to something like urinary leakage. And one of those things is pelvic floor muscle dysfunction. And if those muscles aren't strong enough to help support the bladder and reactive enough to help with those increases in intra-abdominal pressure, like you're mentioning, Allison, when you're jumping, then that can contribute or allow for leakage. From a physical therapy perspective, if it is more related to muscle dysfunction, then we work on strengthening the muscles in the area. Maybe it's the pelvic floor and the abdominal muscles, maybe it's the hip muscles. We'll work with you on helping you manage some of those pressures a bit better, landing softer and working with your breath to help minimize that impact as you're landing, and doing all sorts of things to help compensate for those deficits that are there. So a lot of times in menopause, leakage may be more common, and it can be related to, both pelvic floor and the symptoms of menopause. And from a physical therapy perspective, we want to help work with the muscle function that you have there to help improve however you can your pelvic floor symptoms. So let's see, can I forward the slides here? Oh, there we go. Okay, so let's get back into what is the specific. Let's more specifically look at the anatomy of the pelvic floor here. We've been talking about the pelvic floor a bunch. So here, let's do an official introduction if this is new to you. Our pelvic floor muscles are this group of muscles that are at the bottom of our pelvis, and I have a pelvic model here. So we have the bones of your pelvis, and your pelvic floor muscles are the red ones here on the bottom. They go from your pubic bone to your tailbone, and then left and right between your two sit bones. So they form the floor of your pelvis. So you can kind of almost think of them like a hammock that is helping to support underneath. The 5 main functions of these muscles are for support, like I said. They help hold your organs up against gravity. They also contribute to continence, in which they, when contracted, can squeeze around the urethral opening and the vaginal opening and the anal opening to help prevent you from leaking stool or urine. They also help with stability. Like all of our muscles, they provide strength and stability and mobility to our joints, and our pelvic floor muscles are no different. They provide that strength and stability to our pelvic joints, and really, which is really this foundational part of our body that helps with all the forces from above and below, and helps keep you moving and balanced. And of course, they're important in sexual function. They contribute to erection, pleasure, orgasm. They can also contribute to pain. If those pelvic floor muscles that wrap around the vaginal opening or that help to support the clitoral function are overactive or in spasm, then that can be very painful and inhibit normal sexual function. They also are, like the other muscles in our body, they help to pump blood and encourage circulation of blood and lymph flow through our body. Very, very important muscle group. And so then how do they work? So like I mentioned, the urethra, the vagina, and the anus, they all travel through these muscles. So they surround them, those openings travel through these muscles. And when contracted, the muscles squeeze and lift to help protect and stabilize and close. When you release them, they kind of go back down to baseline and relax on all of the pressure. And then they bear down and open. So this is necessary for like having a bowel movement and delivering a baby. They work together with your abdominals, with your diaphragm, with your hip muscles, and this beautifully concert of muscles that work together. And then what happens when they go wrong, we touched on these, but I wanted to make sure I had it in here so I could answer the questions that had come in. But when these muscles aren't working properly, these pelvic floor muscles are responsible for all these jobs, but if they're weak, if they're underactive and long and they're not able to kind of be supportive like they need to be, then it can lead to symptoms like urinary incontinence or pelvic organ prolapse. If they're overactive or bowel leakage, if they're overactive and tight and they're kind of in spasm all of the time, then it can be they can contribute to more painful symptoms. Also times, and like if you've had a baby, scar tissue can contribute to muscle dysfunction. So we kind of put on here perineal and scar care to help kind of round out the functioning of those muscles. All right, so is it perimenopause or is it a pelvic floor issue? That is a very, very good question. So those symptoms of perimenopause, these include things like mood changes, hot flashes and night sweats, trouble with sleep, changes in sexual desire, joint and muscle aches, menstrual changes. And these are just to name a few. And really it's like, what is a good list of like common symptoms? And I don't know, Alex, how about in your experience? Is there such a thing, as common for what's going on in our life?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all of sort of the big ones. A couple personally. So I said earlier, I'm 45, so I'm smack in the middle of perimenopause. And one thing that's happened for me is like my body odor has shifted a little bit, which is not something I read about in many places.
Good point.
So
yeah.
I will share that like I never needed to use deodorant before, and now I'm like, I definitely need to. And I think I actually talked to Babs, and she was like, yeah, that's all hormonal. It's all about those shifts that are happening within your body.
Yeah, man, those hormones.
Yeah, they're
sneaky little things in our body that really are contributing to a lot of what's going on. And I think we take them for granted when things are going well. But when they're off, they can also contribute to things like vulvar and vaginal changes. You maybe have heard of terms such as vulvar vaginal atrophy or atrophic vaginitis. I feel like if you're going to have heard of terms associated with menopause, maybe those are them. These are kind of older terms associated with menopause. But
like that's so just sounds so terminal.
I know. Well, and it's those are outdated terms for sure. I know. And when you kind of dig into it, what we're talking about here is the thinning and kind of shrinking of the vulvar and vaginal tissues. Our vaginal tissues love to bathe in estrogen, and when it's not there to bathe in, then it can become more thin and brittle and dry. The glands that help to produce your natural vaginal lubricant aren't as functioning, and the thinness of the tissues, the blood flow isn't as good. All of it kind of boils down to unhappy tissues down there. And so you'll actually see physical changes. Maybe the tissue is thinner or redder or irritating and painful, and certainly with things like intercourse, it can be very painful for penetration.
Yeah,
even
actually,
bleeding.
Questions around this. So like one was, we were talking about these kind of common symptoms. So if you have an IUD and you're in your late 40s, is there ways, that you can tell, like, is that going to delay these symptoms or hide them, or how can you tell if you're in perimenopause?
That's a great question. That's a thing. It's very confusing with what your symptoms are presenting you with, and it's always best if you're having confusing symptoms, whether you have an IUD or not. Maybe there are other symptoms that you're experiencing that are going on, to check in with your healthcare provider. They'll be able to kind of run through the symptoms with you, make sure that there aren't any medical concerns related to what's going on, and build a plan. What you don't want to do is kind of like suffer in silence, especially if it is perimenopause. Then there are things that can be recommended and ways that your symptoms can be treated, so you're not having to suffer as much during this transition. Especially when you're looking down the barrel of a longer perimenopausal period, it's not worth suffering when there's so much availability out there. So I would say the first step is, you're having symptoms that are off, not normal for you, check in with your healthcare provider. It's their job to listen to those things. Any other thoughts, Alex?
I was just going to say that the other symptom that should definitely be on this list is sort of mental, emotional well-being, like anxiety, like spikes in anxiety and spikes in depression are super common, and not surprisingly, given everything that's going on with our bodies.
Exactly.
So, exactly. We had another question that I think speaks to sort of some of these symptoms around like change in sex drive. So one woman is 41, has been abstinent for many years. She's nervous that her chances for pleasurable sex are low due to her age and lack of sexual experience. Is that is that something that can be addressed still, or is it something she should, how can she consider like how to have pleasurable sex at this age?
Good question. So there are, it always kind of boils down to what are the extent and underlying causes of what's going on. Oftentimes, when sexual dysfunction is related to your pelvic floor muscles, there are a lot of things that can be accomplished through normalizing our pelvic floor muscles. If sometimes we can make all sorts of recommendations for like lifestyle and behavioral strategies, such as health and diet, and adding different types of lubricant and things to your routine. But when our muscles aren't functioning properly, maybe there's weakness, length, and they're long and weak, and they're not You're not able to have as much sensation. Maybe the blood flow isn't as good to the clitoral organ. Then there are, working on strengthening those muscles can help to improve sexual function a lot of the time. If that sexual dysfunction is related to pain and discomfort, then we also can work with kind of helping to release those muscles and lengthen them, train them to be able to tolerate stretch without pain being the experience. And without pain, there's more desire, there's better arousal, and overall better sexual function. So it's all a cycle and kind of depends on what's going on. But there are always a lot of ways that can be, a lot of things that can be explored to improve sexual function at any age. All righty. My little tile is in the way. Okay. Gotta get our faces out of the way. So common symptoms. These changes affect more than just our sexual function. Our pelvic floor muscles change as well. So we have the vulvar and vaginal symptoms, but our pelvic floor muscles change as well. And the changes in the tissue, in the tissues and the muscles in the bladder and the urethra can lead to other symptoms such as painful urination, urgency, and that is where you're getting that sudden, I got to get to the bathroom now, like you put your keys in the door, you got to drop your groceries and run in, frequency, incontinence, and even possibly urinary tract infections. These menopausal changes can happen most often, in fact. I think, like I said, you might hear about the sexual dysfunction maybe being more commonly, or maybe that's like the older research, so you hear about it more often, but it affects a whole lot more than that. And these are more known as the symptoms of genitourinary syndrome of menopause. So I know that that's a lot, but it's to say that menopause affects more than just your vagina. It can affect, the whole genitourinary system. The vulvar and vaginal tissues, as well as urinary function changes that as a result of menopause. And so this is a more inclusive term that kind of brings relevance to what you're feeling. And it also hopes to, for more research and more treatment and more validation for what's going on.
And I know, Ashley, there was a question about someone who was saying, I'm having symptoms that feel like a yeast infection or like a UTI. And I know we see this all the time in the clinic, right? Where they're like phantom UTI symptoms. It's not an actual UTI. You're on antibiotics every month. Maybe share a little bit more about that, because I know that was eye-opening for me.
Yeah, well, it's so tricky. And I know Dr. Frank touched on it too, and we can kind of go into her answer there. But from a pelvic floor perspective, a lot of our body, especially our pelvic area, is a very complicated area, a very wonderfully complicated area. But it's also like a protective area of our body, right? Almost like a guard dog. Oftentimes what we'll see, like what you're speaking about, like these phantom UTIs or phantom yeast infections, it can be related to this almost like this memory in our body, in our pelvic area. Maybe there was a yeast infection in the past, or maybe you did have some yeast infections in the past, and it can contribute to a lot of chronic pain development in the area. And this area of our body can be confusing a bit. I mean, everything is in close proximity to each other. The bladder is right there, right next to the rectum, and right on top of that is the ovaries and the uterus, and everything talks. There's a phenomenon called pelvic organ crosstalk and sensitization. And we've all kind of heard about chronic pain and the way that our body, our nerves, our brain changes in response to pain, and our pelvic area is no exception. And a lot of times from a chronic pain perspective, these symptoms that feel similar to our body can develop that may feel like a yeast infection or have symptoms of in the absence of the infection. And oftentimes when it's related to the pelvic floor, we work on calming down the muscle dysfunction in the area, the trigger points, the nerves that are irritated, and then retraining that body part that there doesn't need to be pain in that area.
Yeah.
What about you, Alex?
That makes so much sense. And muscle memory is it's so real. And of course, why would it not also apply to our, right? To our pelvic floor. So absolutely. I've learned something new and I love it. That makes total sense. it's also nice to think that it's treatable in, I don't know, in a more organic way.
Sure. And that's from a pelvic physical therapy perspective, right? There is always different causes and explanations, but for the ones when we're seeing them in the clinic and there's no medical cause or explanation for those symptoms, a lot of times it can be about retraining that pain in that area of your body and kind of teaching or kind of just calming down that chronic pain state.
Yeah.
It can be very effective. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the things that Dr. Frank had called out were things that I think you would be able to sort of, you'd see them. It would be, it could be an eczema, it could be atopic dermatitis, but those are things that I think would physically present, whereas what you're describing might not, which is really interesting.
So how to be prepared? Talk about it. Don't let your friends suffer in silence. 32% of women surveyed say that they feel their doctor isn't comfortable talking about menopause and causing them to look elsewhere for support. And maybe that is true for your specific doctor that you have had interactions with, but that doesn't mean that that's where your investigation or care stops. On average, women wait about 6 years before talking to a healthcare professional about their bladder leaks.
Isn't that crazy?
I know, right?
But it makes total sense when you think about how much stigma there is, right, around all of this.
Absolutely.
I mean, honestly, a lot of the women I know never talk to them about it. So maybe 6 is actually like from where we were is a good number.
Yeah, right?
That's so true, because for all of the years perpetuated, it's normal because I've had children or just being embarrassed to talk about it in general.
Yeah. Well, no, I think there's long been this sense of resignation that, this is what happens to my body at a certain point and I just have to live with it. And that's just not true.
Yeah. I mean, that's passed down from generations, right?
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Yeah. So it's not silly if you've kind of felt that way or been there, but it's also not something, I'm just here to say it's not something that you need to put up with either. Because while it is a very common symptom, it's also not normal. And there are things that can be done to help support you through that time.
Yeah, Gabby wrote in to say they're seen as normal, and many women just assume you can't do anything. I was on a hike with my aunt, and she I was right when I started working at Origin, singing the good praise of everything we do, and she was like, oh yeah, well we're on this hike. I'm just wearing my pads because I leak when I cough, and I just have a cough right now. And I was like, well, it doesn't have to be that you leak when you cough. She's like, well, I only get a cough a couple times a year. It's only it's just this whole let
explain it away.
Yes,
yeah. We do that in so many contexts, ladies. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, just explain it away and keep going. Let's just keep going.
Yeah. But if you need help finding a specialist near you, then would you want to talk about your resource library?
Sure. Yeah. So we put together a resource library on our website. You can just put in your zip code and you'll get a nationwide database of pelvic floor therapists, acupuncturists, and urologists and urogynecologists. And yes, awesome. Before starting Attention Grace, I did not know that a urogynecologist was a specialty. But
it's a lovely specialty. I love them.
Yeah, it's super important. It makes sense.
And they are definitely ones that you can go to with all of these symptoms, and they will. They've heard it all before. It's also about building community. Finding peers going through menopause or perimenopause as well. Sit around and laugh about symptoms that you're going through and building support, knowing that you're not on an island alone. And then also, serving out the ways that you have overcome them or gotten, sought out help can be very helpful. And, joining a vibrant peri subculture on Instagram, like I said, to laugh, learn, and feel less lonely.
Yeah, we actually had a quick question, and Alex, I know I want to hear more about the peri subculture because I know that you're the expert on that, but what, we had a question from attendee that was just, what is a urogynecologist? And maybe people know urologist and gynecologist, but what does it mean if they're a urogynecologist?
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say they kind of are more to kind of a little from a more binary perspective, I guess, urology kind of tended to be more in the realm of male urinary dysfunction, prostate care, things like that. And so kind of coming to a urologist with those more female gynecological types of symptoms was a bit out of the scope of that specialty. At times, the urogynecology specialty is more specialized in kind of the marriage of, I guess, both of those parts of the body. So more specializing in the urologic and gynecologic symptoms and how they interact and cross. Very wonderful area of specialty. What were you going to say, Alex? Sorry about that.
I was just going to say, I'd be curious to know, I don't know this, I'll look it up. Like, when did that specialty emerge?
That's a great question.
How long did that take?
Yeah, I don't know. That is a great question. But thank you for them.
Yeah, right.
I love them. Yeah, did you want to talk about the Pear subculture?
Yeah, do you have any good hacks for?
I mean,
find your people on the internet.
Yeah.
So I mean, I confess, I don't know that apps, like, apart from being sort of immersed in this for a job, I don't know that I wouldn't necessarily know that all of this existed. But there are so many accounts out there. I mean, like, it has to be hundreds now of, women just telling their own personal stories as they go through perimenopause or menopause. There's obviously a lot of brands talking about it in really exciting and sort of educational, informative ways. But it's really kind of, I think our mothers would all just be amazed by this.
My mom was like, millennials, we're just going to talk about it.
Yeah. And so you can definitely see that happening even now on all the different social channels. So it's it's fun. There's one in particular is called Perry, Perry. And they are really funny, and
they're a hoot. That's awesome.
They're a hoot. They're definitely.
You're talking. I had to check when urogynecology became a specialty.
Thank you.
And the first people were board certified in 2013. So literally less than 10 years ago.
That's bananas. Wow.
Why does that make me angry feeling?
A little bit. A little bit.
Man. All right. So how to be prepared. Find a primary care provider. It's key to have a healthcare provider who is familiar with perimenopause, listens to your concerns, and takes a problem-solving approach to your symptoms. So like I said, maybe it is true that in individual instances, your provider is not someone that responds well to the questions of concern that you have related to perimenopausal or urinary or sexual dysfunction symptoms. There are wonderful providers out there that are there to listen and support and help you through this life change as well. And connect with a pelvic floor physical therapist. Having a pelvic floor PT evaluation in your 40s can be game changing. It is never too late to have a pelvic floor muscle assessment and improvements if there is muscle dysfunction present. I think I get this question all the time. I had a baby 20 years ago and I've been having urinary symptoms ever since. Is there really any, benefit of me continuing pelvic or seeing a pelvic PT now? Absolutely. Just like you would, your legs and arms, your pelvic floor muscles are no different. And there's so many ways that we can help you move away from the symptoms that are slowing you down. And then track your symptoms. This is going back to kind of, yes, if you're having these symptoms that are concerning to you, you need to head back to your healthcare provider and check in on them. But tuning into your body and writing things down, your symptoms, it's an underrated way to support your health so that you know when things are off. It's hard to kind of pinpoint exactly, I don't know, my period is ish, this range. But when you start really looking and tracking, it can be really helpful and enlightening for what's going on in your body. This can allow you to also to tell your PCP and your physical therapist exactly what's going on, which will make the whole transition, diagnosis, and treatment a lot easier for everybody. And then revisit your wellness routines. Perimenopause is a great time to revisit and readjust your exercise, your nutrition, your mental health routines in ways that best serve and support you. We talked about all these symptoms that are popping up, and there's no better time than the present to kind of check back in with yourself and see what's going on. Any other recommendations, Alice?
No, I mean, I think I think it is a really good time. it's easier said than done. I don't claim to have this mastered, but really like taking the time to like sit and listen to your body, and like the idea of tracking, and taking notes, which, I know that most of us just don't do for ourselves. So I think those are really, really good tips.
Well, and it's also like, I don't even have time to slow down and like pay attention, let alone write it down, find my journal. But it's so important, and taking that step can become habitual and cathartic almost, and empowering.
Yeah, super empowering for sure.
And Alex, I know you are the menopause expert. So do you want to, I think knowing what to do, knowing what resources are going to be most useful, and sort of like building, it's like when you have a baby and you have like your hospital bag. I feel like this is like the menopause bag.
Yes.
What do you think about like kind of including here? What are some other products or brands that, you're really excited about?
Yeah. So, obviously excited about our products, our liners and our hybrids. We have a full line of incontinence pads that are free from all of the sort of toxic chemicals that, who knew, are in the top sheets of conventional pads. So normal pads are made up of petroleum and bleaches and dyes and all those nasty things. And so we made ours with sugarcane and left all the nasty stuff out. So they can be super helpful. Like I said at the beginning, I wear our liners for my period, my phantom period, whatever it is at this point in my life. Prickly. And so Speaks is great if you're having light leaks or maybe like light period flow and light bladder leaks. Like Speaks are fantastic. They're reusable. They're super sustainable. And Prickly Pear Activewear is this awesome female founded brand based out of Colorado, that designs activewear to wear when you're having bladder leaks. So basically you can run without a pad or a liner or what have you, which is fantastic. And then a few of the other brands that we love. Taboo is an awesome, also female founded. I mean, all of these brands I think are female. Yeah, are all female founded. No, we are. They are. Taboo and yeah. Oops. Taboo and Dame are great for sexual wellness. Mm-hmm. We actually have a couple of our older customers have been introduced to these brands, and they're chatty about it, and they've had a great time. They've had great success. And so our wipes are also great for hot flashes. I was saying earlier that I had one a couple of hours ago. It is no joke when those things come on. And State of Menopause is another new brand in the space that has a cooling mist that we love. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. But there's lots of good stuff going on in this space. So
cool. And I'll just do a shameless plug. We're going to do a random drawing at the end of this to one of the lucky people who is attending will get this awesome giveaway from the Attention Grace team that's got their pads, their liners. I think it's got their signature bag, some wipes. So someone will get to experience the awesome products that you guys have built.
Thank you.
And with that, I know we have a bunch of Q&A, so we can definitely go through some that we had in advance. But if you have any ones that you're like live right now and want to write them in, feel free to throw them in the Q&A. Otherwise, I think, Ashley, one thing that we didn't touch on that I think would be helpful is, we talked about like your pelvic floor can weaken, that can lead to the prolapse or incontinence. Like, how can you, what can you do about that, like on your own, other than Kegels, which I think, everyone knows, but it's like such the tip of the iceberg. So what are some things people can think about to strengthen their pelvic floor in this time where it might be naturally weakening?
Yeah. So, our pelvic floor muscles are like any other, muscle that we use in our body. This is made out of the same types of muscles as our biceps, or our quads, our glutes. So when we think about strengthening a muscle, we think about exercising it, contracting and releasing and doing these repetitive resistance training for our muscles. And our pelvic floor muscles can be the same. Not all pelvic floor muscles need to be strengthened. I will put that kind of caveat out there. But if a muscle is long and weak and needs coordination, we will do strengthening. We will recommend strengthening exercises. Those can be in the forms of Kegels, like you mentioned, and that is a pelvic floor contraction. You contract the muscles and you relax the muscles. That is like you're trying to hold back a flow of urine. That's a pelvic floor contraction and relaxation. You can work on endurance training with those contractions, or quick flick training, because those muscles need to work on it with endurance and speed for those, when you trip or when you're laughing. as the title of this presentation is, those muscles are working for those moments. But in addition to that, I mentioned our muscles work with our abdomen and our hip muscles and our back muscles. Our body works together. And so, and rarely are you leaking when you're just kind of sitting quietly. It's during those more dynamic, fun movements. And so also thinking about training your pelvic floor muscles with the rest of your body and with the movements that exacerbate symptoms, with the impact to help lighten the load. I think, Alex, you mentioned at the beginning, losing weight can sometimes be effective. And that is helpful in kind of reducing a lot of that impact and weight on the pelvic floor muscles. So it can be a whole variety of things, even working on what you're drinking, what you're eating, timing of things. If you drink a cup of coffee and have leakage, then maybe don't drink that cup of coffee right before you head out, with your friends or with, right before that one specific event. It always just kind of depends on what's going on and what's contributing. And there's so many different ways that we can work with somebody, especially if their pelvic floor muscles are compromised, to help improve their symptoms. Yeah. And hopefully that answers your question. If not, hop back in the chat.
Yeah, we had a lot of questions around, well, here's a good one. I've been told my pelvic floor isn't weak, but tense.
Yeah.
Do you have suggestions that would be kind of the anti-Kegels, if you will? I like that.
The anti-Kegel, exactly.
That's so good.
Yeah, it's really on the opposite end of the spectrum. I mean, if you can kind of think about like our pelvic floor muscle function kind of being from anywhere from super, super weak to super, super tight. And it can kind of swing anywhere along the way. When we have muscles that are the opposite of weak, or the opposite of underactive, we consider that more overactivity in our pelvic floor muscles. Those muscles can also present as a weak muscle, which is why I say Kegels aren't for everyone. And someone with leakage might have leakage because their muscles are weak. It might be because those muscles are so tight that they're already contracted and they don't really have anything left to give or support. And oftentimes that can be what's occurring in those muscles that are overactive. And that can occur for a number of reasons. It's habitual. Maybe I tend to grip and tense my stomach all the time, along with my, my shoulders, tucking them up into my ears. So, our pelvic floor muscles can be along that kind of tension holding pattern. And over time, our body goes, oh, okay, I think you want me to keep them here. And so they can shorten and remain tense over time. And certain other triggers, we talked about the yeast infection or a fall or trauma can contribute to that as well. And those muscles go into kind of this defensive mode and have a hard time releasing. But we want a strong, healthy muscle is one that can produce a strong contraction and also an effective relaxation to prepare for the next time it kind of is needed. And so those anti-Kegels can sometimes be, what we're trying to do with a muscle that's overactive is teach your body to help release that tension. And that can be in the form of, breathing, calming down your central nervous system. It can be retraining those muscles to lengthen. It could be giving the muscles the range of motion back that it needs, through stretches and down training, maybe trigger point release, yoga, all sorts of things to kind of help normalize what those muscles want to be doing, which is holding in tension.
Makes so much sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's so valuable. I think there was another question sort of around like the same, would you do similar stuff? There's a question around like trying to relax their pelvic floor while urinating or peeing. Would you do similar things there, or is there any different process, or like, other than turning on the sink to
yeah, I know, right? Well, and it can be, yeah, I know, right?
Check in the book, as it were.
Well, and it just depends on what is going on. Sometimes when you're having a hard time releasing your pelvic floor muscles when you're peeing, sometimes you're contracting those muscles. Sometimes, because, there can be, the coordination can be kind of confusing sometimes, especially if there was injury. Maybe there's scar tissue. Maybe you had a significant tear in childbirth, or an abdominal surgery that's in the scar tissue is affecting your bladder. And all of that can just create and contribute to tension in that pelvic area, and also confused signals. Like I said before, that whole area of our body is very intimately related to each other, and signals can confuse the other areas of our body. So sitting down, while it feels like this like primal, and it is, movement of our pelvic floor muscles, oftentimes there can be confusion as well, maybe because of overactivity that's there, or maybe just because, you know, along the way something had become off, the coordination came off course. So just depending on what's going on, it may look like teaching someone to breathe. It may look like teaching someone to lengthen the muscles, or it may be doing some internal kind of muscle release to help get that body back in touch with that movement again.
Yeah, we had a question around like tools that you can use and do exercises with. I'm guessing maybe this is like, you know, not the PT here, but dilators or something like the Kegel trainers that we use. Could you maybe talk a little about those and how those could be used, you know, in perimenopause, menopause?
Sure. So the Kegel trainers are awesome. They are one really fun way to help, I guess it like encourage or kind of get you excited for. I mean, no, it's so boring to if what your pelvic floor needs is to squeeze and relax, and maybe you've kind of gotten yourself, okay, at every stoplight I'm going to be doing these exercises. That's not necessarily a functional thing to be teaching your pelvic floor. These Kegel exercisers are kind of like high-tech devices that you insert into the vagina. There's various different brands, LV, Kegel, one I'm blanking is Perry. I'm blanking. Kegel and LV are the two that are coming to mind right at this moment. But you insert them into the vagina, and it has sensors for feedback. So you can squeeze your muscles on these sensors, and through Bluetooth, it can input the information on your phone. And really, you know, you can work with them with a physical therapist. If you've gotten it on, you know, on your own, then there's programs that you can follow in the instructions. But with a PT, what we'll do is we'll help you kind of find your baseline and help you run through these training programs. It's really like video games for your pelvic floor muscles. And it helps to kind of keep you inspired and competitive, I guess, to kind of continue these exercises in a more fun, effective way. And so, you know, like I said, these muscles, you know, if you needed to strengthen them, you know, for pregnancy, these muscles can also be strengthened in menopause. And when there are these normal age-related muscle weakening that can occur, along with the changes that can occur in menopause, then focusing on strengthening those muscles can go a long way in helping to improve your function. You mentioned dilators. Dilators are more oftentimes used to help retrain those muscles to stretch without pain.
Got it. Well, I know we're almost at the end of our time. So I think one of the questions that I just thought would be lovely to end on is like, what should I be looking forward to? I feel like we've done a lot of like, these are the symptoms you're gonna have to deal with. This is like what behold. So I'd love if either of you have anything to share, you know, sort of like what's great about this stage of life, or Alex, like what, you know, the learnings you've had either.
Yes, I love that question too. And I would love to hear your answer, Alex.
Oh my God, I loved it. And it was really funny. I accidentally included it when I sent it to Dr. Frank. And she was like, wow, that's a big one. You know, but truly, like, all jokes aside, so I'm in my mid-40s, and knock on wood, like I have, yes, like the perimenopausal symptoms that I've been dealing with they're annoying, and goodness knows, maybe they're going to get worse, and maybe they're going to last for 10 years, but maybe they won't. And I overall, like, I've really never been happier. And like, you see women talking about this a lot, like not just happy, but like just very much at peace with who you are. And like, you're kind of done. Like, you're just done worrying about things and people that don't matter, if that makes sense. Like, I just feel like the older I get, the more, the clearer my priorities become. And that can be really empowering and very freeing. And, yeah, I don't know. I'm excited for it. So
I love that. I feel like that is the perfect answer.
I don't know.
Fantastic.
Check back with me in 10 years. We'll see if I'm this optimistic.
Amazing. Well, thank you guys both so much for your time, and thank you everyone who joined us tonight. I think it's a really important conversation to have, and hopefully you can walk away with a little bit more understanding about your body, a little more confidence on kind of what's to come and maybe what's happening now. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys. Thank you for joining us, everybody. This was fun.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.